Chasing false positives, battling alert fatigue, finding the proverbial needle in a haystack. It all leads to cybersecurity staff burnout and increased security risk. Check out Managed XDR from Netshurian. Netshurian's Open XDR platform unifies your telemetry for wider attack surface coverage, deeper threat detection, and ultimately faster incident response. And Netshurian SOC empowers your team by doing the heavy lifting with continuous monitoring, proactive threat hunting, and guided remediation. Looking for a true partner instead of another vendor? Visit msspalert.com/Netshurian. All right, welcome back to Cyber for Hire, the Managed Security Podcast. Once again, I'm Bradley Barth with SC Media. We just spoke with A.N. Ananth from Netshurian on building, partnering on, or buying your SOC capabilities. If you missed it, I would strongly encourage you to watch. But right now, I'd like to welcome back my co-host Ryan Morris from Morris Management Partners, because it's time for us to examine our security news and trends topic of the day, presenting our big idea in security: emergency patching, managing your clients' zero-day fixes. The developer of a commonly used software issues an urgent out-of-band update for a coding vulnerability that's discovered to be under attack. Immediate patching is imperative. Under such circumstances, what can MSSPs do to quickly identify which of their clients are running this vulnerable software version? And then what are the best practices for managing and collaborating with these exposed organizations in order to ensure timely cooperation and a decisive response? That's what we're going to be talking about today here with Ryan. Ryan, welcome back to the show. And I'm going to start off by basically asking you, we see zero-day vulnerabilities being announced all the time. We're going to talk about, even just a little bit later in the show, about Apple releasing some emergency security updates. There are times where they can be maybe not so big a deal, and then you have your log4js, your log4shells, where it's a major crisis. And so I'm wondering if this process for an MSSP starts with assessing how serious the zero-day vulnerability actually is. Is it a log4j? Is it something that's a little bit more benign or overblown? Do you, as an MSSP, make that judgment call alone, risking the possibility that you're wrong and then making your clients upset and angry with you?
You know, it's a great point of it, because while zero day is a common conversation, the way that we manage and execute through those experiences is unfortunately not a common conversation. And the most important single thing that I want everybody to think about as we're having this conversation is the increasing intensity on time execution, right? So when I first got involved in cybersecurity 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, makes me old, right? When I first got involved, when you would get an update of a patch requirement that needed to be executed, we were talking days to weeks in terms of the threshold when systems needed to be remediated and re-verified and make sure that everything was done. We got that zero-day phenomenon, and we realized, oh no, it has to be done in the same day. Based on the people that I work with and the folks that we talk to in the trenches of doing managed security, that threshold these days is ideally in the realm of 20 minutes, right? And that's not what the typical operation is tuned to accomplish, right? We live in a world of annual contracts. Hopefully, we live in a world of quarterly business reviews and monthly status updates and a regular cadence of preventive maintenance and the things that we do with our clients. Like you said, out of band, real-time, zero day has the potential to throw all of that operating discipline out the window and create a panic, hair on fire type of an event. That is the very last thing we want to be seen doing by our customers, because it is our ability to operate with discipline and confidence under fire that creates the credibility that makes it so people actually want to pay us to do this work for them. No matter how good we are technically, if we're not capable of doing the work in minutes that we used to do in days and not having a panic tone about us. If we can't do that, people are going to lose confidence. And unfortunately, Bradley, you made the point. These things are happening all the time. A very good way to think about it in our assessment and responsibilities. I saw somebody make a comment about graphic design recently. They were talking just about the way that you put tools into the hands of non-professionals, and they have a million capabilities, but they don't necessarily know what to do with them. So there's a tendency to use all of the tools. And the way they summarized this whole argument of a little bit goes a long way. They were like, just remember that if everything on the page is in bold, then nothing on the page is in bold. It's not distinguished, it's not separate, it doesn't justify or receive any special level of treatment. I bring that back into the world of cybersecurity, and I think that is something we need to really adopt as a professional filtering responsibility. And that needs to be pre-communicated to the customer. We're not here to say, I'm going to make this decision in a vacuum and I will impose it on the customer. We need a prior conversation that says, hey, one of the things that we do for your world is filter that unlimited number of alerts that come through your environment. If we are proactively monitoring, if we're doing the preventive maintenance and we're seeing what's going on in the environment, for any medium to large size organization, it's very possible that the quantity of alerts coming through that environment is literally in the hundreds to thousands per day. Right. I was talking recently with an MSSP who does this. They have the SOC operations, and they live in this remediation world on a daily basis. And they said, if you use the right tools, right, use your technology, use machine learning and artificial intelligence to filter alerts and recognize patterns and such, right? If you use the automation effectively and you can cut out 80% of the alerts based on pattern recognition, and the humans only need to respond to 20% of the alerts, if you look into a real world environment, a single technician in a SOC might still be doing 2, 3, 400 or more alerts per day. If every single one of those alerts comes through, and I'm not saying it's 400 different 0 days that happen in one day, that would make all of us collapse, right? It's different levels of alerts, and then the 0 day gets tossed into that river of noise and aggressive attention that we need to give to this. If we panic on everything, Chicken Little with the sky is falling, it doesn't take long before people stop listening to us and don't react with the urgency that's necessary. Okay, so when I take all of that context and I boil it down to a specific response mechanism in the environment, I will say there's 3 specific areas that we need to be paying attention to. Number 1, technical operations. Do we have a map of our client's existing environment and the ability, once we've identified an important or urgent response alert, do we have the ability to individually select the customers that are vulnerable or are not vulnerable? If we blanket apply a patch to systems that are not exposed to that situation, then we're going to create a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear that doesn't need to be in the environment. Do we have the ability to identify and filter for only those that are vulnerable? Do we have that real-time patching capabilities? And do we have a clear set of expectations with the customers if systems need to be taken offline and brought back on, if it can go to a failover system, if it can be applied in real time without interruptions? All of that needs to be defined before the 0 day occurs, right? So I believe that that's an area of methodology creating credibility where an MSSP has a great opportunity to set themselves apart and remind the customer, hey, you work with us because we are professionals and we know how to do these things. That's where most of us stop, unfortunately, right? We stop at technical operations. But there's a second and a third. The second area is communications. There is technical communications with the IT department or the cybersecurity professionals inside the client. There is operational communications to users, to anybody who's affected by the system. And then there is a third level of what I will call executive communication, where we need to make sure that we tell the bosses, the CISO, the other line of business leaders, the C-suite executives. We need to go back to these folks and go, guys, this is what happened. Here's how we applied the methodology, and here's what you need to know. The third piece, and this is the one where I think it's absolutely critical. If we've got technical operations, if we've got communications, the third piece is validation of zero state, meaning that once we've responded to this thing, once we've done all that busy work and we have actually patched all the systems and we've figured out that we are back to a good, healthy state, we need to test and validate that we are back in good shape. And in many cases, practically speaking, what that means is once the patch is applied, once everybody is good, we need to reintroduce that threat into the customer's environment and verify in real time that the updates we made actually caught the exploit, right? Most people are just good. They're running so hard and so fast in real time that they don't take the time to stop, verify, and then move forward. And it's amazing how many times we see MSSPs going back in and actually resolving the same patch problems, doing that panic mode response thing on the technical operations side, doing it again for the same zero-day exploit because they either didn't get it right the first time or they did, but they didn't verify it. So they had to go back in and reapply all of the patches. That is just it's a ton of extra work that we don't need to be manufacturing for ourselves, but also that's a real confidence problem that we can make for ourselves. So 3 areas, remember, technical operations, communications, and validation for your zero-day processes. If we can define those things as method and process, not only does our team know how to execute in real time without panicking, but we can use that to communicate back to our clients. We know what's going on. We have the experience and the discipline to execute in real time. We got you. We can make you fine in a production world.
So let's take those 3 areas then, and if the challenge is to then define those 3 areas, let's spend our time further defining those 3 and offer some recommendations on what they can do. So on the technical operations / visibility side, how do you optimize that? Because, there can be instances with certain vulnerable code where the code can be a little bit hidden in some instances that aren't always so easy to spot. So how do you try to maximize your visibility? And if you're caught in an instance where maybe you don't have the optimal visibility that you're looking for, then how do you mobilize and coordinate with your clients to hopefully get them to aid and assist in the visibility process?
See, you make a very good point. I began that conversation with a killer assumption, right? Technical operations begins by filtering for the clients that are affected versus those that are not affected. That's not something you do in real time. That's not something you do during the zero-day response process. That has to be a prior work activity that leads us to a profile of the customer environment and an identification of what their key systems are, what their current state is, right? What the patch level is on software, so we know whether or not it needs to be further updated, and then what the kind of key operating processes are, so that we can prioritize that rollout with the customer. That all has to be homework, right? That's prep and prerequisite that gets us to the point of being ready to respond. I think that's a great thing for us to do right now with each of our clients, right? Now, depending on how many clients you're dealing with, if you are working in the dozens, that's easy to do for everybody. If you're working in the hundreds, you probably don't have enough time in addition to the work you do every day to do that tomorrow for everybody. So you need to have a prioritizing criteria. And if you're dealing with customers or, in instances in the customer environment into the thousands, that literally becomes your account management methodology. We need to know who is most urgent, who is most vulnerable, and who is most in need of prior work. And then once we get people up to the current status, how do we actually filter for the communication of 0-day environments? Like you said, there are times where those exploits are incredibly isolated and niche, and they're going to apply to 5 or 6% of the client environments that we deal with. There are others where it's going to be literally 100%. Everybody needs to get that update. It has to start now, where we begin that profiling, status match, and customer operating diagnostic. That's prior work that needs to be done starting now. And by the way, if that is a one-time activity that we need to do to onboard our customers, the ideal time to do that is the very first month that we're working with a new client. If we're already working with a client, we haven't gone through that, my advice is that could become an additional out-of-band work activity that could actually be extra to the regular operating terms of your day-to-day contract. It's not true for every environment, obviously, but we can get to a place where we can justify both, tactically as well as financially, doing that extra work and getting our customers up to a place where we know exactly who you are, exactly how you are configured, and if you are vulnerable to things, so that when 0-day arrives, we can operate with real precision and velocity.
All right, let's talk stage 2 now, communications. There's a lot of things potentially that have to be run back and forth with the client. All sorts of key decisions that I can think of, like, all right, installing the patch. This could disrupt operations depending on what kind of business you are. So when is the optimal time to do that? Do we, in some cases, institute certain workarounds or mitigations? Do we disconnect certain services until the patch is fully ready to go? And everything in between. So what, in your mind, name 2 to 3 of your top key decisions that jointly have to be made together and communicated with the client during this stage 2 communications process?
Absolutely. And again, prior work makes real-time execution infinitely more effective. The thing we should not be doing is making a take a system offline or don't take it offline decision in real time. That is the number one area where we need to be having a prior communication with the customer and establishing a profile or a definition of these are the attributes of a threat, of a vulnerability that we will respond to, that will justify taking systems offline in real time. And that cannot be a blanket conversation, right? Because email going offline in real time versus my financials application versus my transactional application, those things have radically different thresholds. So what we need to do in that profiling process is to establish the matrix of systems that are deployed in the customer's environment, and then the attributes that would indicate whether this can be done offline and applied in a slow period, nights and weekends, et cetera, right? Whether this is something that can be done in tandem with a mirrored system, or whether this is something that has to be done in real time in a production environment. I understand real-time operations intuitively, and I am very reluctant to take anything offline in the middle of the day in a customer production environment. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't happen occasionally. So let's develop that matrix and identify exactly what the thresholds are so that our technicians know when we see A, B, C, that meets the criteria. Let's take that thing offline and move forward, right? So that's the very first one that I would do. The second one that I would highlight here for us, again, is the non-technical communications process. I think most MSSPs live in a world where we communicate daily, multi-daily with our clients about technical operations, right? There's alerts, there's notices, there's work tickets that are going back and forth in real time. But we do not often communicate with the executive client community, the people who are running sales, running the customer service department, running the finance department, et cetera. Those people rarely hear from the MSSP unless it's a hair on fire emergency, and then that freaks people out, right? let's make sure that's not the only time they hear from us. But when we do communicate, there has to be the structure of what's next included in each communication. This is what's happening. This is what we have done so far. And this is what will happen next in non-technical language that you don't need an advanced certification in cybersecurity to decipher, right? I think we do ourselves a disservice when we do not plan proactively for those non-technical communications. And especially if you find yourself in a situation where we're going to take business applications offline in the production environment, if that ever happens and it's the first time that VP of operations or customer support or whatever, if that's the first time those people have heard from you or the first time in a year that they've heard from you, that communication is not going to go well, right? We need a cadence of communication in non-technical language, but it needs to be established that we are in their environment, and when the stuff hits the fan, we're in charge and we're about to let you guys know what's going on. I think that's a gap that we've identified in too many MSSP environments that we should be able to close pretty productively.
All right. So before we wrap up this big idea, we still have stage 3. So let's discuss that. And this is the remediation, eradication of the threat of the potentially exploited vulnerability, and then just reviewing to make sure that you have successfully banished all instances of this malicious code. From an MSSP perspective, what is the most challenging thing about doing this via an MSSP model, and how do you put yourself in best position to overcome those challenges?
You make a good point right there in your question. Because we are a third party, there's a natural tendency for customers to want us to be focused on real-time activity, right? Like, what are you doing for me lately? That's what people want to understand. As a result, preventive maintenance and the proactive work that we do for our clients, we understand why that's valuable, and we can communicate to ourselves and to the technical professionals why that's a good idea every day. But the finance people might come back in and go, well, we don't have any problems. I don't understand why you guys are focusing so much on all of that preventive. That applies in multiples to the conversation of validation, right? You think about the acronyms of methodology that we use in our industry, right? There's protection, detection, alert, response, remediation, right? Everybody has their own flavor of what that sounds like, but it's a good approximation of what standard operating methodology is in a security real-time environment. Most people stop at that remediation. Like I built a wall around you. I made sure that you were protected. I identified something was going wrong. I reacted to it. I cleansed your systems. Cool. Let's move back into production mode. When you stop at remediation without adding that next piece of validation, you're setting yourself up for future problems. It's extra work. It may, in a daily operating environment, feel a tad redundant, but it's absolutely mandatory, not only to go back and communicate to the customer, guys, we're in this environment, we solved the problem, and we can prove to you that the solve was successful. That's good discipline, but it also eliminates future inefficiency and unnecessary rework from our operating environment. So I think we can't stop at remediation. We just have to make sure we add validation. That needs to be spelled out in the contract. That needs to be defined as a valid activity that is included in our contract environment. And there needs to be a defined communication process for when we've completed the work so that we can notify people, right? The difference between project environments where we have that user acceptance testing at the end of the project, right? Like, this was the criteria, we did the work, you accepted and signed on the dotted line that we did that. That's fairly standard in a project environment. When you move into a evergreen contract operating environment, people just, for whatever reason, they lose that discipline. They forget the validation and the user acceptance part that needs to be reinserted so that anytime you have a 0 day, we fix it, we test and verify that it was in fact fixed, and we go back and we capture literally, if this I would go so far as to say, let's capture a signature on a document that says this happened, we fixed it, you acknowledge that we fixed it, right? If you can't get that far into your operating environment, then at least it needs to be written communication documented in your ticketing system, in your email environment, et cetera. Validation is a miss for most people in a zero-day environment. We need to reinsert that discipline. Excellent. All right, guys, thank you very much for listening in on our big idea in security. Obviously, that one is one that's born from the lessons we've learned from people who do this stuff every single day. If you have additional thoughts, if you question our logic, we would love to hear back from you. So please let us know what your feedback and responses are, and you can get us at our show email or on the show page, because we want to keep this conversation going and continue to advance the state of the art. So we've got, in a couple of minutes, we've got our news items that we're going to be running through. But before we get there, we want to do our section that we call Dear Cyber for Hire. Dear Cyber for Hire is an advice column segment where we get to play marriage counselor between MSPs and the clients that they work with to help kind of communicate through the difficult times and mend the fences when the relationship might go awry. So we're going to present a scenario to you. This has been anonymized to protect the innocent in the situation, but be rest assured that this is a real world example that we know happens out there all the time. So Bradley, let me turn it over to you. What is our advice scenario today?
Well, as always, Ryan, we have plenty of juicy MSSP melodrama for you. And this one comes from the client side of the relationship. So, fellas, cue the music. Dear Cyber for Hire, why is fate so cruel? All I've ever wanted is a one and only who knows how to satisfy my needs. But alas, my current partner is rather inexperienced in that department. That's right, you catch my drift. My MSSP has been hiring younger, less experienced employees lately, and I worry this may result in diminishing returns. I understand there are a lot of open jobs out there and a lot of pressure to fill these positions, but are these workers even qualified or certified? How can I be sure these new additions don't extinguish the flame that I once carried for my services provider? Help me, CFH. Sincerely, Despondent Indicator. Ryan, sometimes cybersecurity is a little bit like a teaching hospital. If you're the patient, you never want the junior medical resident working on you. You want the head of the department, but that's not always possible. But at the same time, you still want every doctor ideally to have a basic level of competence. So in this case, how do we know if these are good hires or malpractice? What's your advice here?
This is such a great topic because it is the heart of the issue that we deal with in the cybersecurity industry, right? On this program, you and I have both discussed at length the challenge of finding a quantity of humans to solve the problem, right? We all recognize, there's 600,000 published job openings in cybersecurity. We don't know how to find enough people. We're out there hunting and trying to hire as many as we can. The extra part of this that I think is interesting is our customers recognize the need and they are willing to pay for the service in general, but for expanded services. And this is a market demand where we could make more money if we could just find enough people to fill these roles. And unfortunately, across the industry, we have noticed that there is a tendency towards lowering the bar on criteria, qualification, and expectations as we're bringing new hires in. I get it, right? Like that is a natural response. If I have 10 open headcount positions and I've interviewed 10 people and I cannot find 11, 12, and beyond, I have a real need to, maybe I should going to hire all 10 of them. But they weren't all superstars. And that you're not getting the cream of the crop when you just hire anybody with a pulse who comes through. To solve this problem, I think the MSSP needs to develop 3 elements that they can really pay attention to. Number one is that we need to create the connection in the customer's mind between our systems and process, not specifically the individual humans. You know how we always say, Our people are our number one asset. Our people are our most valuable resource. I understand what we're trying to communicate when we say that, but if your individual humans who are in individual job roles working with specific clients, if they are the reason your customers work with you, I like my guy, right? Like Bradley is my guy. That's who does my work. I am really attached to them. And if you ever move them off of my account, I'm going to get really upset. That creates a real problem for us as a service provider. When we put too much stock in the individual, we paralyze our ability to promote and advance that individual or to scale and diversify our own team. So we need to make sure that we are focusing the brand equity on our systems and our process and get to the point where we can create confidence with the customer, whether it is Bradley or whether it's Ryan who's in the chair. We both will execute with fidelity to the process and create exactly the right outcome, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing that we need to do is to define the onboarding methodology, the criteria that we're looking for, who we're going to hire when we do that, but what the ramp up and the onboarding methodology actually is. Systems and process create credibility in that world. When we deploy somebody into a customer's environment, don't hire a guy today and then deploy him into the customer's environment tomorrow. That's not enough onboarding. There needs to be a very defined method for we bring them in, we train them, we test them, we verify that they can execute our environment and our processes successfully for our clients. Then they will be mentored, they will be deployed into a supervised environment, and then they will hit the floor, right, in real production environment. Your steps might vary slightly from what I just described, but to have a defined methodology that we can show to a customer on a piece of paper, when we add 3 new headcount to your team, this is exactly how we have gone through this process. That eliminates a lot of problems, and they go, oh, these guys know what they're doing. I'll trust them through the onboarding cycle. The third thing, and this is an interpersonal one that we know for sure, we need to add interpersonal characteristics and capabilities to the skill set that we interview for, right? I know that some of the most brilliant technicians and engineers and cyber professionals that we deal with, they talk awesome to the code, but they don't necessarily talk awesome to the people. We need to interview and prefer interpersonal communication skills in the people that we hire, whether they are fresh out of college or whether they've been in this industry for 20 years. The ability to communicate clearly, confidently, comfortably with our customers, that needs to be an equal criteria for your ability to understand and execute at a code level in our environment. And that means we need to train for that. We need to support our people in that. We're never done learning how to communicate effectively, right? You and I been doing this forever, and we still get trained on how to communicate effectively. Training and certification on cyber tools, on threat vectors, on remediation methodologies, all of that is necessary in your environment, but you also need to train and validate communication skills, because when you bring a new person in, if they sound awkward, well, there went all those years of credibility that you were investing into that client relationship. Number one, build the brand at the systems, not at the individual. Number two, have a defined onboarding and deployment methodology. And number three, let's train our humans to speak comfortably with our clients so that we can create that confidence. So hopefully that'll help us kind of get through this process and actually overcome. Because I believe, and Bradley, I'm sure you see this out there as well in the real world, we will deal with more young technicians this year, next year, going forward, because those extra 600,000 headcount, they don't just already exist in the world and we just need to recruit them over here. We need to manufacture new humans who have these skills. And that means they are going to come in with less than 5 to 10 years experience in doing what we do. These are people that are coming out of school, that are coming out of certification programs in real time. That's reality. We need to communicate that to our customers.
Very true and great advice, Ryan. Another MSSP marriage saved, we hope. Hopefully, our listeners have learned from this and don't make the same mistakes. And remember, if you've been struggling with your managed security services relationship, whether you're the user or the provider, we want to hear from you. So please write to us at cyberforhire@cyberriskalliance.com, and we might just use your letter in a future episode. Well, as any security practitioner can tell you, there's no shortage of headlines filling up the cyber news feeds every single day. So we wanted to highlight a few items that we curated just for you. And so we present to you the security detail. Jumping right into things, headline number one for you, Ryan. Ransomware gang uses new zero-day to steal data on 1 million patients. So speaking of 0 days, here we go. What do you got to tell us on this, Ryan?
See, this is one of those, again, we were just talking about how do you execute in the 0 day, and people say, well, I know how to do that. Well, apparently not everyone, because this is not a small situation. This is a significant hospital environment, multiple locations, hundreds of thousands of customers coming through on an annual basis, and they have been subjected to a 0 day exploit that yielded, unfortunately, the identifiable information for more than 1 million patients. Now, that is not something that any of us should accept as normal operating procedure. Somebody needs to go to the link that we have in the show notes here and look at, I don't want to say out loud the name of the hospital system, but you can find it in the media and you can know what I'm talking about, and give these guys a call, right? Somebody, if you are their MSSP, please get back involved. If you're not their MSSP, maybe you should be, and let's do a follow-up. But I can't enforce enough how tactically important this kind of process is. No matter how much progress we've made, no matter how much work we have done on prevention, detection, and response, it still works. These guys still get penetrated, and we can't take it for granted. So it happens in real time, and we need to be out there solving this problem for our customers. Let's move on to our next headline. The one for you, Bradley, our first one: malicious hackers are leveraging Microsoft OneNote to infect victims. That sounds pretty basic. How are we responding to this, Bradley?
Well, let's start with the basics. Most of you probably know that OneNote is a digital notebook created by Microsoft. The folks over at Proofpoint, they've been observing threat actors delivering malware through these OneNote documents, basically those .1ONE extensions, using email attachments and URLs. This is a direct result of Microsoft last year blocking malicious macros, which have long been a popular vector of choice for delivering a key piece of malware to infect an organization. So now, with that obstacle being thrown up, bad guys, of course, are experimenting with new means of intrusion. And OneNote, while Proofpoint describes that as an unusual tactic, it could become more of a popular weapon of choice if it proves successful. So obviously something MSSPs need to be aware of. Proofpoint noticed particular rise in these attacks in December of last year and in January 2023. One particular initial access broker group in particular, they noticed was dabbling in this. And so again, because of the perhaps malicious macros not being such a great avenue anymore for certain attackers, Proofpoint is essentially warning, watch out for maybe some new unusual avenues like OneNote or virtual hard disk or compiled HTML files. All could be interesting alternatives. So there you go with that. Headline number 3 for you, Ryan. Are C-suite executives fluent in IT security speak?
The short answer is, unfortunately, no. And this is actually some really good research that's been put out. Again, we have a link in our show notes where you can see this stuff. But an article ran recently on MSSP Alert where some research that's been put into the field. It was published by the folks over at Kaspersky, and we're digging in to find some additional lessons. This is actually the response from the other side of the table, right? The way we need to understand this is on one side of the research, when we ask cyber professionals whether or not they are communicating effectively to the business side and getting the point across about systems, about vulnerabilities, about technologies, and about how we are providing service to fix those things. If you ask me, am I communicating effectively? Most of the time, my answer is, well, absolutely, I'm doing just fine. But when you go to the other side of the table and you ask the business people, A, do you understand what those cybersecurity people are talking about? And B, do you understand the underlying threat and some of the challenges that we're dealing with? The research shows that the answer is no, right? Like what we found in some of the sobering data that comes out of this research, non-IT respondents, right, folks that are not on our side of the table, 98% of them say we have had a miscommunication with our IT security provider that led to some kind of a bad consequence. Ouch, right? 98%. That's not kidding. And it's not the only data point that we wanted to highlight, but it is something that I hope brings back to the urgency. We've talked on this program before about the need to speak business when we are communicating with our clients. And that's clearly not yet done. We're not finished with that challenge. And we need to make sure that we continue to retrain our people and retune our communication messages so that they don't sound like foreign language in a cyber environment, but they sound like the regular language of the customer and the humans who are on that side. CEO, CFO, COO. These folks, they tell us they don't understand what we're talking about, and they tell us that they don't feel comfortable in a meeting actually saying, guys, I don't know what you're talking about. They don't want to look stupid, right? I get that. But we need to understand right here, right now, this is a problem. We're not getting the message across, no matter how well we think we're communicating. Our recommendation to you is let's have this conversation with our customers. Let's go back across the aisle and say, all things equal, where are you comfortable? Where are you not comfortable? How can we educate? How can we change how we communicate so that we can get this story across as effectively as possible? Okay, move on to one more headline for us here then, Bradley. Significant code execution patches are coming from our friends at Microsoft and Apple. What do we need to know about these?
Well, since, we've been talking patching a lot today, I thought it would be good to share a couple of important notes from last week's Patch Tuesday. According to Steve Zurier at SE Media, security researchers reported that 2 of the 3 0 days fixed in Microsoft's last Patch Tuesday release were for vulnerabilities that could potentially allow attackers to escalate privileges to a system level. And researchers warned that by gaining system access, an attacker would then be able to pair the flaw with code execution and then be able to move laterally through a victimized network. And meanwhile, on the Apple side, they very recently released emergency security updates for an actively exploited zero-day vulnerability in iPhones, iPads, and Macs. It's described as a WebKit confusion issue that can be exploited to trigger OS crashes or gain code execution on devices that are targeted if the user can be tricked into opening a malicious web page. So those are some of the latest vulnerability announcements that you should probably be aware of. And with that, we're going to move on to one last little bit that we always love to do. So drum roll, please, as we announce our irrelevant news item of the week. And this is a real news pitch that Ryan or I have received in our inboxes for reasons that are entirely inexplicable to us. But we'll see if maybe somehow we can make it a little bit about cybersecurity. Are you ready, Ryan?
I am ready. We're getting a lot of good responses from the audience. People are reaching out to us and letting us know about things. Not all of them are really relevant. So let's hear this one.
All right. Well, this one was addressed to me, and it goes a little something like this. Dear Bradley, I head up franchise development for Gym Guys, a one-of-a-kind fitness franchise that's disrupting a $30.8 billion industry. I was browsing your experience at Cyber Risk Alliance and think you might be a good fit for franchise ownership. Why are we outperforming other fitness concepts? Because the industry still hasn't figured out what clients want. On-demand, on-site, and in-person and in-home personal training that eliminates trips to the gym and maximizes time. Ryan, I ask you, what is it about me and my Cyber Risk Alliance experience that you think makes me a perfect fit for this organization? Is it the guns? Is it the big guns that I'm always flashing?
See, I was going to say that this is recognition, right? You gotta recognize and then acknowledge when people recognize your guns that you bring to the show, right? So, congratulations on that recognition. But what I will say is this was a good example of people who know how to execute a mail merge macro in an outbound email campaign, but not necessarily an actual reading the customer's webpage and understanding what the heck it is that they do for this stuff. That happens a ton, and it is going to bring a lot of communications our way. But I mean, I buy the fitness mentality. We all need to be a little bit more healthy and consciously involved in this. And if they see in your background a franchise opportunity, I mean, it's the shots you take, not the shots you don't take in this world that lead to success. So, I mean, they know something about you, Bradley. So
I guess so. They know something about me that I don't know. I mean, like I would say that, let's put it this way: if someone decides to open up a franchise of gyms, specifically with the idea in mind that this is just to basically get you to like dad bod level, the dad bod gym, like that's the bar we're setting. I'm not a dad, but like I still feel like I probably fit in that dad bod mold. That maybe I would be a spokesperson for. Okay, if somebody wants me to be a spokesperson for that, the new dad bod gym, I'll do that. But this one, not sure I'm really quite the fit that they think I am.
But that's the thing, right? We aspire to greatness in this world. So hey, they recognize that maybe we need some help here, and maybe there is a target profile inside the cybersecurity market space. We all spend a lot of time at our keyboard watching alerts and responding to urgent things, and that means we don't get up and walk around maybe as often as we should. I think maybe we are an ideal target audience, and you bring the credibility. So let's build that franchise.
Maybe you're right? Keyboard workouts. So we got some of the strongest fingers of any profession in the world, probably. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up, Ryan, for our irrelevant news item of the week. Hope you had some fun with that. But now we're out of time. But don't worry, we'll be back again soon for episode number 10. Meanwhile, feel free to check out even more cybersecurity podcast content on the SC Media, MSSP Alert, and Channel E2E websites. Until next time, I'm Bradley Barth.
And I am Ryan Morris. So please reach out to us and let us know your comments, your questions, and your insights about any of the topics we've discussed today and the broader world of cybersecurity. We will keep the conversation going on the next episode of Cyber for Hire, your inside source for cyber outsourcing.